The crystal champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, a sound as sharp and final as the crack of bone. Amelia's hand flew to her cheek, the sting blossoming into a furious, throbbing heat that echoed the shock in her heart. The diamond on her finger, the one David had called a symbol of their unbreakable bond, felt like a shackle. Across the cavernous living room of their Manhattan penthouse, David stood, his hand still raised, his face a mask of cold fury she'd never seen before. Her husband, the father of the child growing inside her, and beside him, a small, triumphant smile playing on her perfectly painted lips, was Isabella. Her hand rested on David's arm, a gesture of ownership, of victory. The air crackled with the unspoken truth that had just been violently revealed. In that one, soul-crushing moment, Amelia's perfect life, the charity galas, the Hamptons weekends, the carefully curated illusion of a fairy tale marriage, wasn't just fractured, it was obliterated. The shards of glass on the floor were a mirror to her own shattered soul. 3 months earlier, the gilded cage had still felt like a sanctuary. Amelia adjusted the silk sash over her baby bump, the fabric a soft whisper against her skin. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Upper East Side apartment, New York City glittered below, a sea of diamonds scattered on black velvet. It was the view from the top, a vista David Sterling had earned through what he called sheer force of will. Amelia had once believed him. Their life was a meticulously choreographed ballet of success. David, with his chiseled jaw and bespoke suits, was the titan of sterling capital, a man who moved markets with a single phone call. Amelia was his perfect counterpart. Elegant, poised, the philanthropic wife who chaired the right committees and charmed his business partners. She'd met him at a gallery opening, a whirlwind romance that felt like a movie script. He'd pursued her with a relentless, intoxicating focus, making her feel like the only woman in a city of millions. He'd built this cage for her, plated it with gold, and convinced her it was a palace. But lately, the gold had started to feel cold to the touch. The spacious silence of the penthouse often felt less like peace and more like a void. David was working later, his phone perpetually angled away from her, his explanations for missed dinners becoming increasingly vague. "It's a big deal, Ames," he'd murmur, kissing her forehead, his lips cool and distracted. "You know how it is. We're on the verge of something huge." She tried to believe him. She was pregnant with their first child, a son, and the nesting instinct was a powerful sedative. She focused on decorating the nursery, choosing shades of soft blue and cream, imagining David teaching their boy how to throw a baseball in Central Park. She held on to that image like a shield. The first real crack appeared not with a bang, but with a name: Isabella. She was David's new COO, a woman he'd hired without even mentioning it to Amelia. "She's a shark, a real killer," David had said, with a rare spark of genuine excitement. Exactly what the company needs to level up. When Amelia finally met her at a company dinner, she understood. Isabella was everything she wasn't. She was sharp edges to Amelia's soft curves, her ambition a palpable force field. Her dark, knowing eyes had swept over Amelia's pregnant form with an expression that was not quite pity, but something far more unsettling. Assessment. "You must be so thrilled to be taking a step back," Isabella had said, her voice smooth as bourbon. It wasn't a question. Amelia had smiled, a polite, practiced gesture. "I'm thrilled to be starting our family." David had beamed, placing a possessive hand on the small of Amelia's back. "My two best girls," he'd declared, oblivious to the icy current passing between them. After that night, Isabella's name became a constant presence. It was Isabella's strategy that had landed the new merger. It was Isabella who had stayed late with him to close the deal. It was Isabella's idea to host a celebratory gala at their penthouse. "Isn't that a bit much?" Amelia had asked, feeling a prickle of unease. "Our home?" "It's a power move, Ames," David had explained, his tone laced with a faint condescension she was beginning to recognize. "It shows them we're not just a company, we're an empire, and you're the queen." But as she stood overseeing the caterers for that very gala, the title felt hollow. She was a glorified event planner in her own home, a prop for the man she loved. She'd caught David on the phone earlier, his voice low and intimate in a way it hadn't been with her for months. He'd hung up the second she entered the room, a flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, crossing his face before being replaced by a dazzling smile. "Just finalizing some details for tonight," he'd said, a little too quickly. Now, as guests began to arrive, their laughter echoing off the marble floors, Amelia plastered on her own smile. She was Mrs. Sterling, the gracious hostess, the expectant mother. She moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and compliments on the decor, all while a cold dread coiled in her stomach. She saw David across the room, deep in conversation with a banking magnate, and right there, at his side, was Isabella, looking radiant in a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin. She laughed at something David said, leaning in to whisper in his ear. He didn't pull away. He inclined his head, their intimacy a stark, public performance. For the first time, Amelia didn't see a colleague. She saw a rival. The cage door had just rattled, and for the first time, she truly, terrifyingly wanted out. Isabella Rossi moved through the world, as if she had already conquered it, and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. She was a master of the subtle power play, the psychological chess match that unfolded in boardrooms, and now, in the Sterling's own home. Her campaign to undermine Amelia was a masterpiece of plausible deniability. It started with small things. She'd accidentally have her assistant send Amelia schedules for David's business trips that were slightly different from the ones he'd given her, creating tiny seeds of confusion and distrust. "Oh, my deepest apologies, Amelia," she'd say in a follow-up email, dripping with false sincerity. "Things are moving so fast, I must have sent you an outdated itinerary. David and I had to make a last-minute change." David and I. The words were always linked, a casual branding of their partnership. Then came the gifts. Isabella would send bouquets of lilies to the apartment, exquisite, funereal white lilies, knowing full well Amelia was allergic. When Amelia would start sneezing, David would be annoyed. "Ames, it's a nice gesture. Don't be so sensitive." Isabella had positioned herself as thoughtful, and Amelia as ungrateful and difficult. The battleground was often David's perception. Isabella cultivated an image of herself as the indispensable woman who understood the pressures of his world in a way a stay-at-home wife never could. She'd text him late at night with urgent work questions, pulling his attention away when he and Amelia were finally having a quiet moment together. If Amelia protested, David would sigh, exasperated. "This is business, Amelia. This is what it takes to pay for all of this." He'd gesture around the opulent penthouse, a gilded reminder of what she stood to lose. The psychological warfare escalated. At a dinner with investors, Amelia, who had a degree in art history, was discussing a recent exhibition at the Met. Isabella waited for a pause, and then, with a light, dismissive laugh, said, "It's so charming how you have time for such lovely hobbies, Amelia. My idea of art lately is the beauty of a perfectly executed hostile takeover." The investors chuckled. David squeezed Isabella's shoulder in appreciation. In one clean stroke, Isabella had painted Amelia as a frivolous dilettante, and herself as David's intellectual and professional equal. Amelia felt like she was losing her mind. Every attempt to voice her concerns to David was met with accusations of jealousy, or paranoia. "Are you seriously threatened by my COO? The woman who is making us millions?" he'd ask, his voice sharp. "She's all business, Ames. You need to relax. It's probably the hormones." The pregnancy, which should have been their shared joy, became his weapon against her. Her valid fears were dismissed as irrational mood swings. Her intuition was just hormonal anxiety. He was gaslighting her, and Isabella was handing him the matches. The serpent's most venomous strike came one rainy Tuesday afternoon. Amelia had a doctor's appointment, a routine checkup, and had asked David to come with her. It was the first time they were supposed to hear the baby's heartbeat together. He promised he would be there. He said nothing was more important. Amelia waited in the sterile examination room for 45 minutes, the thin paper crinkling beneath her every time she shifted. The nurse popped in twice with a sympathetic smile. Finally, Amelia's phone buzzed. A text from David. "So sorry, baby. Emergency at the office. Can't pull away. Isabella is working her magic. We're about to close the Henderson deal. We'll make it up to you. I promise." Tears of disappointment and fury pricked her eyes. She typed back a single word. Liar. She went through the appointment alone. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of her son's strong heartbeat, a lonely drum in the silent room. It was a sound of profound love and profound solitude. As she was leaving the clinic, her phone buzzed again. It was an alert from a news app. The headline read, "Sterling Capital CEO David Sterling and COO Isabella Rossi spotted celebrating at Jean-Georges." The accompanying photo was a paparazzi shot. David and Isabella were clinking champagne glasses, their heads close together, his eyes locked on her with an intensity she hadn't seen directed at herself in years. Isabella was laughing, her hand resting casually on his thigh. The timestamp on the photo was from 20 minutes ago. There was no Henderson deal. The emergency at the office was a lie. Her husband had skipped hearing his son's heartbeat for the first time to have a celebratory lunch with his mistress. The air left Amelia's lungs. The serpent wasn't just in the garden anymore. It was coiled around her heart, squeezing the life out of it. The rain plastered her hair to her face as she stood on the sidewalk, the city blurring around her. The cage wasn't just cold, it was suffocating. And she finally, unequivocally, knew that the man she had married was not her partner. He was her keeper. And he had just handed the key to another woman. The gala was a masquerade in more ways than one. Guests in designer masks and glittering gowns mingled, their laughter echoing through the penthouse, but Amelia saw only the masks everyone wore every day. The mask of the happy couple, the mask of the loyal employee, the mask of the devoted friend. Her own mask, that of the serene and glowing mother-to-be, felt heavy as lead. She had been on autopilot since seeing the photo of David and Isabella at Jean-Georges. A cold, quiet rage had settled deep in her bones, a feeling so potent it sharpened the edges of the world. She hadn't confronted him yet. What was the point? His lies were a fortress, and she no longer had the energy to storm the walls. Tonight, she decided, would be her final performance as the dutiful Mrs. Sterling. She watched him from across the room, a knot tightening in her chest. He was holding court, Isabella firmly at his side. They moved together with an easy, practiced synchronicity. A team. Amelia felt like a ghost in her own home, haunting the periphery of a life that was no longer hers. The confrontation she hadn't planned for was forced upon her. She had retreated to the master bedroom for a moment of quiet, her feet aching, her heart heavier. The door was slightly ajar, and she heard their voices from the hallway. David's low and urgent, Isabella's a triumphant purr. "She's getting suspicious, David, the way she looks at me," Isabella was saying. "Don't worry about Amelia." David's voice was dismissive, almost cruel. She's emotional, pregnant. She knows which side her bread is buttered on. She's not going to do anything to jeopardize this. And what about after the baby comes? Isabella pressed. I'm not going to be your dirty little secret forever. You won't be, David said, his voice dropping to that intimate tone that made Amelia's stomach clench. Just be patient. The prenup is ironclad, but a messy divorce with a newborn, it's bad optics. Once the baby is a few months old, I'll handle it. I'll give her a settlement that will keep her quiet and comfortable, and then you and I can have everything. Amelia's blood ran cold. Handle it. Keep her quiet. She wasn't his wife. She was a business problem to be managed. Her son wasn't their child. He was a logistical hurdle in David's affair. She didn't know what propelled her out of the room. It was a primal, instinctual force, the protective rage of a mother. She walked back into the living room, her eyes locking on David. The guests, the music, the city lights, it all faded to a dull roar. She walked straight up to him, her voice trembling but clear. I want everyone to leave. Now. The chatter faltered. Heads turned. David's smile froze. Amelia, what are you talking about? Are you not feeling well? He tried to put his arm around her, a public show of concern. She flinched away from his touch, as if burned. Don't touch me. She turned to Isabella, the venom she'd been swallowing for months finally rising. And you, get out of my house. Isabella's eyes widened in feigned innocence. Amelia, I think you're overwrought. Get out. Amelia's voice was a shriek, raw and ragged. David's face darkened. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. Stop it! You're making a scene! A scene? Amelia laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. You're sleeping with her. You skipped hearing our son's heartbeat to have lunch with your mistress. You want a scene, David? Here it is! His eyes darted around the room, seeing the shocked faces, the whispering guests. His entire world, the empire built on image and reputation, was imploding. And it was her fault. You have no idea what you're talking about, he hissed, his face inches from hers. You're hormonal and hysterical. I heard you, she shot back, tears streaming down her face now. In the hall, you're going to handle me? Keep me quiet and comfortable? Was that the plan? The last vestiges of his control snapped. In that moment, she was not his wife, the mother of his child. She was the single greatest threat to his carefully constructed universe. All his rage, his narcissism, his cornered animal panic coalesced into one singular, violent impulse. He drew his hand back and slapped her. The sound was a thunderclap in the suddenly silent room. The shock on the guests' faces was a horrifying tableau. Amelia stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, the pain a white-hot explosion. But the most searing image was the one she saw over David's shoulder. Isabella. Her mask of concern had fallen away, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. A small, proud smile graced her lips as she watched her rival fall. She had won. David stood, chest heaving, his hand still tingling. He looked from Amelia's horrified, tear-streaked face to the silent, judging eyes of his investors and friends. He had just detonated his own life. Amelia's eyes, clear and blazing with a pain that had burned away all fear, met his. It's over, David, she whispered, her voice a low, steady promise of retribution. Then, with a final, contemptuous look at Isabella's smiling face, she turned and walked away, leaving the ruins of her marriage and the shattered pieces of her heart scattered across the marble floor. The silence in the chauffeured car was more deafening than the screaming had been. After Amelia had walked away, a mass exodus of guests had followed, their hushed, scandalized whispers trailing behind them. David had instructed his driver to take Amelia to their Hamptons house, an edict delivered without looking at her. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a banishment. He needed her out of sight while he performed damage control. Amelia sat staring out at the blurred lights of the Long Island Expressway, her cheek still throbbing, a dull ache that radiated down to her soul. The slap was a physical manifestation of years of emotional blows she had ignored. The gaslighting, the dismissiveness, the isolation. It had all been leading to this. He hadn't just hit her, he had revealed himself. The charming, ambitious man she'd married was a facade. Beneath it was someone hollow, cruel and weak. She spent the first 24 hours in the cavernous, empty beach house, in a state of shock, moving from room to room like a phantom. She didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard knot in the center of her being. Her baby kicked, a small, insistent flutter, and for the first time, the feeling didn't bring a smile. It brought a terrifying clarity. She was not just a wronged wife, she was a mother. Her son would not be raised by that man. He would not grow up in a house built on lies and cruelty. That thought was the spark. The next morning, fueled by a resolve she didn't know she possessed, Amelia started to fight back. Not with emotion, but with intellect. She had been the art history wife, the decorative piece. David and Isabella had underestimated her. That was their first mistake. She started with David's home office, a place she usually avoided. It was his domain, filled with mahogany and the scent of expensive cigars. She ran her fingers along the spines of his leather-bound books, but her target was the sleek, silver laptop on his desk. She knew his password. It was the anniversary of the first deal he ever closed, a date he revered more than their own wedding anniversary. Once inside, she didn't look for emails or texts about the affair. That was the emotional wound. She needed the strategic weapon. She started digging into the company files he'd synced to his personal computer. As the wife of the CEO, she'd sat through countless boring dinners, listening to him boast about his wins. She'd absorbed more about finance and corporate strategy than he ever gave her credit for. She spent hours, then days, sifting through spreadsheets, investment portfolios, and encrypted folders. Her initial search was for his true net worth, evidence for the divorce proceedings she knew were coming. But she found something more. She found a pattern, a series of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, a shell corporation named IR Investments, IR Isabella Rossi. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy. David was siphoning money from sterling capital, millions of dollars, and funneling it into a company controlled by his mistress. It was brazen, arrogant, and highly illegal. He was embezzling from his own company, defrauding the investors who had just witnessed him assault his pregnant wife. The hidden motive clicked into place. This wasn't just about leaving her for Isabella. It was about starting a new life with a stockpile of stolen cash. He wasn't just going to divorce Amelia. He was planning to gut his own company and leave the wreckage behind. He and Isabella were partners in crime, and Amelia was just collateral damage. She found encrypted transaction logs, private correspondence with a shady offshore banker, and a draft of a business plan for a new venture in Dubai, set to launch in 6 months, co-owned by David Sterling and Isabella Rossi. Her baby was due in 4. The timeline was sickeningly clear. He was going to wait until the baby was born, handle her, and then disappear with his lover and his stolen fortune. Amelia's hands trembled, but not from fear. It was from the sheer, unadulterated power of what she had discovered. She meticulously downloaded every file, every spreadsheet, every incriminating email onto a thumb drive she found in a desk drawer. She made 3 copies. One she hid in the lining of her maternity suitcase. One she sealed in a plastic bag and buried in a potted plant on the patio. The third, she slipped into her pocket. As the sun set over the Atlantic, casting long shadows across the pristine lawn, Amelia's phone rang. It was David. His voice was calm, measured, the voice he used to placate angry board members. "Amelia," he began. "I know you're upset. I lost my temper. It was inexcusable. I think we should talk. I'm sending a car for you tomorrow. We'll see a therapist. We can work through this." The old Amelia would have craved those words, clung to the hope of reconciliation. The new Amelia heard only the lies. He wasn't sorry. He was scared. His public image was in jeopardy, and he needed to get his hysterical wife back under control. She took a deep breath, the salty air filling her lungs. "There's nothing to talk about, David," she said, her voice devoid of the emotion he expected. It was cold, clear, and steady. "I'll be in touch." Before he could respond, she hung up. The unraveling had begun. But it wasn't going to be hers. It was going to be his. Returning to the city felt like entering a war zone. David had, as promised, sent a car, but Amelia had no intention of going back to the penthouse. Instead, she directed the driver to a modest brownstone in Brooklyn, a world away from the gleaming towers of her former life. She paid him in cash and told him he could tell Mr. Sterling he'd dropped her at a friend's. Let him wonder. Let him feel a sliver of the uncertainty she had lived with for months. The door opened to reveal Chloe, her oldest friend, a sharp-witted journalist Amelia had been systematically isolated from since her marriage. David had always found Chloe too cynical, too inquisitive. Now Amelia understood he'd found her too perceptive. Chloe's eyes took in the faint bruise on Amelia's cheek, the dark circles under her eyes, and the grim set of her jaw. Without a word, she pulled Amelia into a fierce hug. "I've got the guest room ready," she whispered. "And I made lasagna." In the safety of Chloe's cozy, book-filled apartment, Amelia finally allowed herself to break. The tears she hadn't shed in the Hamptons came in a torrent, a storm of grief for the man she thought she'd married and the life she'd lost. Chloe just held her, letting her pour out the whole sordid story. The affair, the gaslighting, the missed appointment, the slap, the chilling conversation in the hall. When she was finished, her voice hoarse, Chloe handed her a glass of water. "Good," she said, her expression grim but resolute. "Now the mourning is over. It's time to get even." Amelia took a shaky breath and pulled the thumb drive from her pocket. "It's more than just getting even, Chloe. It's about justice. He's a criminal." She explained what she had found: the offshore accounts, the shell corporation, the plan to defraud his investors. Chloe, a financial reporter, listened with growing intensity, her journalistic instincts kicking in. She plugged the drive into her laptop, her eyes scanning the files. "Ames, this is dynamite," Chloe breathed, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "This isn't just a messy divorce. This is wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement. He could go to prison for a very long time. Both of them." The word prison hung in the air. Part of Amelia recoiled. This was still the father of her child. But then she remembered his cold voice saying he would handle her, Isabella's triumphant smile, and the sting on her cheek. Her resolve hardened. He had made his choice. Now she would make hers. "What do we do?" Amelia asked, her voice stronger now. "We don't go to a divorce lawyer," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming with purpose. "Not yet. A divorce lawyer will use this as leverage for a bigger settlement. We go bigger. We go to the authorities. But we do it smart. We need someone who can't be bought. Someone who will see this through to the end." Chloe spent the next hour making calls, tapping into her network of sources. Finally, she scribbled a name and number on a notepad. Marcus Thorne, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. They call him the Bulldog. He made his name taking down white-collar crooks. He despises guys like David Sterling. And the best part? He's not a fancy private attorney. He's a public servant. His only client is the United States government. The next day, they met Marcus Thorne in a sterile, impersonal office in a federal building downtown. He was a man in his late 40s with a tired face, rumpled suit, and the most intelligent, piercing eyes Amelia had ever seen. He listened to her story without interruption, his expression unreadable. Amelia, who had once charmed rooms full of billionaires, found herself nervous, but she told him everything, her voice steady, presenting the facts calmly and concisely. When she finished, she slid the thumb drive across the table. Thorne picked it up, weighing it in his hand as if it were a weapon. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Are you aware of the implications here? If we pursue this, your husband's assets will be frozen. Your life will become a matter of public record. It will be ugly." "My life is already ugly, Mr. Thorne," Amelia replied, meeting his gaze. "I'm aware of what he stands to lose. I'm more concerned with what he's already taken from me and what he planned to take from his investors. And I will not have my son's last name be associated with a man who got away with it." A flicker of something, respect, admiration, crossed Thorne's face. He stood up. "I'll have my forensic accounting team look at this immediately. Don't talk to your husband. Don't talk to anyone. We will be in touch." Walking out of the federal building and into the bright afternoon sun, Amelia felt a profound shift within her. She was no longer a victim waiting for her fate to be decided. She had taken the stolen pieces of her life and handed them to a man who could forge them into a weapon of justice. The power imbalance had begun to tilt. David thought she was hiding out in the Hamptons, licking her wounds. He had no idea she was in his city, calmly and methodically dismantling his empire. For 2 weeks, Amelia lived in a state of suspended animation at Chloe's apartment. She went to her prenatal appointments, took long walks in Prospect Park, and tried not to jump every time her phone buzzed. David had left a dozen messages, his tone shifting from feigned concern to frustration, and finally to outright anger. He had sent flowers, which she'd had Chloe donate to a nursing home. He had even, in a move of stunning audacity, had a new Tesla delivered to Chloe's address, a gift she promptly had towed. He was trying to buy her forgiveness, her silence. He still thought she was a commodity. The call came from Marcus Thorne on a Thursday morning. "We've got it all," he said, his voice grimly satisfied. "It's even worse than you thought. He was setting up a complete asset transfer. In 2 months, Sterling Capital would have been a hollow shell. We're ready to move. Warrants are being signed as we speak." Then he made a proposal. "He's been trying to reach you, correct? He thinks this is a domestic dispute. He has no idea what's coming. We have an opportunity here to get a confession. Would you be willing to meet with him? While wearing a wire?" Amelia's blood ran cold. See him again? Face the man who had hit her, who had plotted her disposal? The fear was a visceral, physical thing. But the thought of him talking himself into a prison cell, of his own arrogance becoming the final nail in his coffin, was a powerful motivator. "Yes," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "I'll do it. But on my terms, in my territory." The meeting was set for the following afternoon at the penthouse. Her territory, where the final act of her marriage had played out. A team from Thorne's office fitted her with a tiny, discreet recording device, a small, cold piece of metal against her skin. "Just keep him talking," Thorne instructed. "About the money, about Isabella. Let him think he can win you back. Let him brag." When David opened the door to the penthouse, his face was a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. "Amelia," he said softly, reaching for her. She stepped back, out of his reach. "We need to talk, David," she said, walking past him into the living room. The spot where the champagne flute had shattered was immaculate, but she could still feel the ghost of the broken glass under her feet. He followed her, his demeanor pleading. "I know we do. Ames, I am so sorry. I've been out of my mind with worry. What I did, it was monstrous. I'm not that man." "Oh, but you are," she thought. She sat on the sofa, a picture of calm she did not feel, and looked at him. "Why, David? Why her?" It was the question he expected. He launched into a well-rehearsed speech about pressure, about loneliness at the top, about making a terrible mistake. He painted himself as the victim of circumstance. "But it wasn't just a mistake, was it?" Amelia said, her voice quiet. "It was a plan." He frowned, confused. "What plan?" "IR Investments," she said, letting the name drop into the conversation like a stone. He froze. A flicker of genuine panic crossed his face before being quickly suppressed. "That's a subsidiary, a business account. What about it?" "It's Isabella's initials, David," Amelia continued, her heart pounding. "The money you've been moving from the leveraged accounts, moving it offshore. What was the end game? Were you going to leave the company and the country high and dry?" He stared at her, utterly stunned. This was not the conversation he had prepared for. He had expected tears and recriminations, not forensic accounting questions. His mind was racing, trying to figure out how she could possibly know. He fell back on his old tactics, denial and condescension. "Amelia, you don't understand the complexities of my business," he said, forcing a laugh. "You're getting worked up over standard corporate structuring. I was moving that money to protect it, for us, for our future. I was building a nest egg that no one could touch." "For our future?" she pressed. "Or for your future with her? The one you were going to start in Dubai in 6 months after you'd handled me?" His face went white. She knew. He didn't know how, but she knew everything. His entire demeanor changed. The pleading husband vanished, replaced by the cornered predator. "You have no idea what you're messing with," he snarled, taking a step toward her. "You went snooping. Did you really think you could outsmart me?" "I didn't have to," she said, standing her ground. "You were just that arrogant." He laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "Okay, fine. So you know. What are you going to do? Tell some divorce lawyer? I'll bury you in court. I will prove you're an unfit mother. I will take our son, and you will never see him again. I own the best lawyers, the best PIs. I will ruin you." She looked him dead in the eye. "You think this is about a settlement?" "It's always about the settlement," he sneered. "So let's hear it. What's your price? What does it take to keep you quiet?" "It's funny," Amelia said, a slow, sad smile touching her lips. "The U.S. Attorney's Office asked me the same thing." The color drained from his face. At that exact moment, the penthouse door burst open. Marcus Thorne strode in, flanked by 2 FBI agents, their badges displayed. "David Sterling," Thorne said, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement." David stared at Amelia, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. He looked at the wire she now revealed, a small, blinking light on her chest. He had walked right into the trap, his own ego the bait. As the agents cuffed him, his eyes, wild and furious, locked on hers. He had held all the power, all the cards. And in one stunning, breathtaking reversal, she had taken it all away. He wasn't the master of the universe anymore. He was just a common criminal, brought down by the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. The arrest of David Sterling sent shockwaves through Wall Street. It was the lead story on every financial news network. The Golden Boy CEO, the titan of Sterling Capital, taken from his penthouse in handcuffs. The narrative was irresistible. A story of greed, betrayal, and a scorned wife who had engineered his downfall. The press initially fed a story by David's PR team about a hysterical, vindictive spouse, quickly pivoted when the U.S. Attorney's Office unsealed the first part of the indictment. The evidence was overwhelming, and much of it had been delivered by Amelia. Isabella's reckoning was swift and merciless. She was arrested an hour after David, pulled from a board meeting at the Sterling Capital offices. Her icy composure finally cracked as she was led out in front of her colleagues, the triumphant smile she'd worn at the gala now a rictus of terror. Faced with the mountain of evidence against her and the prospect of a decade in federal prison, her loyalty to David evaporated. She took the first deal Marcus Thorne offered, agreeing to testify against David in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her self-serving motives, once cloaked in ambition and love, were laid bare. She was loyal only to herself. In the end, she sold him out for a lighter sentence, the final pathetic act in their grand romance. For Amelia, the aftermath was a whirlwind of legal meetings and media scrutiny. She was the star witness in the government's case. David's high-priced legal team tried to paint her as a liar, a woman motivated by jealousy and greed. They brought up her art history degree, her role as a stay-at-home wife, trying to portray her as too unsophisticated to understand the documents she'd uncovered. But on the witness stand, Amelia was unshakable. Guided by Thorne, she calmly and clearly detailed David's manipulation, his gaslighting, and the financial crimes she had painstakingly pieced together. She spoke not with the fury of a wronged woman, but with the cold, hard clarity of truth. When David's lawyer tried to intimidate her, asking snidely, "Isn't it true, Mrs. Sterling, that you were simply angry your husband was leaving you for a more successful woman?" Amelia looked past him, directly at the jury. "I was angry that my husband hit me," she said, her voice ringing with quiet power. "I was angry that he dismissed my concerns about our unborn child as hormonal hysteria. And I was furious when I discovered that the man I had built a life with was a thief, stealing from the very people who trusted him. This isn't about my marriage, it's about his crimes." You could have heard a pin drop. The jury saw her not as a vengeful ex-wife, but as a woman of immense courage and integrity. David's empire crumbled. With his assets frozen and the company's reputation in tatters, Sterling Capital went into receivership. The investors whose money he had tried to steal became his most vocal critics. The friends who had once clamored for an invitation to his parties now pretended they barely knew him. The entire edifice of his life, built on a foundation of lies and intimidation, collapsed under the weight of a single, undeniable truth. The verdict came after only 6 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. David Sterling, the master of the universe, was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. As he was led from the courtroom, his face was pale, his arrogance finally extinguished, replaced by the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. His eyes met Amelia's for a fleeting second. There was no anger left, only a vast, empty expanse of defeat. He had underestimated her, and it had cost him his freedom. Amelia walked out of the courthouse, not into the arms of a new lover or into a waiting limousine, but to a waiting taxi, alone. Chloe met her at the apartment with a hug. There was no champagne, no celebration. There was only a quiet, profound sense of release. It wasn't a victory, it was a reclamation. She had reclaimed her dignity, her sanity, and her future. As she placed a hand on her stomach, her son kicked, a strong, steady rhythm. He would be born in a few weeks, and he would be born free. His last name would be his mother's. 5 years later, the salt-tinged air of Charleston, South Carolina, was a world away from the stale, recirculated air of a Manhattan penthouse. Amelia, now known by her maiden name, Amelia Hayes, pushed her 4-year-old son, Leo, on a swing in a sun-dappled park. His laughter, bright and carefree, was the only currency that mattered to her now. After the trial, she had wanted nothing more than to disappear. The settlement she received from the dissolution of David's assets was substantial, but she used most of it to create a foundation that provided legal aid to victims of domestic abuse and financial fraud, a quiet act of turning her pain into purpose. She kept enough to start over, to buy a modest, historic house with a sprawling garden in a city where no one knew the name Sterling. She had rebuilt her life not on the grand scale she had once known, but on a foundation of authentic, quiet joys. She ran a small, successful art gallery downtown, a place that celebrated local artists. It didn't make headlines in the Wall Street Journal, but it filled her with a sense of accomplishment David's reflected glory never had. Her life was smaller, but it was infinitely more real. It was hers. Leo was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, a boy with her eyes and a spirit entirely his own. She was raising him to be kind, to be honest, to respect women, to be everything his father was not. She had answered his questions about his father simply and without bitterness. He made some very bad choices, she'd explained, and now he has to live somewhere else for a long time. Leo had accepted it with the simple logic of a child. His world was here, with his mother in the sunshine. Her friendship with Chloe was stronger than ever. Chloe often flew down for weekends, marveling at the transformation. "You're a different person, Ames," she'd said on her last visit, watching Amelia potting geraniums, her hands covered in dirt. "You're happy." And she was. It wasn't the giddy, performative happiness of her old life. It was a deep, abiding peace that came from self-reliance and hard-won freedom. Love had found her again, not in a whirlwind of intoxicating promises, but in the slow, steady rhythm of shared coffee and easy conversation. His name was Ben, a local architect who had helped her with some renovations on the gallery. He was kind, grounded, and he had a gentle smile that reached his eyes. He knew her story. In a small town, secrets were hard to keep, but he saw her, not her past. He loved her for the woman she was, not the wife she had been. He was teaching Leo how to build model airplanes, and their shared laughter often drifted from the back porch. One afternoon, a letter arrived with a New York postmark. It was from David, his first and only letter from prison. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened it. The letter wasn't an apology, not really. It was a rambling, self-pitying account of his fall from grace, the musings of a narcissist who still, after all this time, couldn't comprehend his own culpability. But one sentence stood out. "I think about that night all the time. I never thought you had it in you." Amelia folded the letter. He still didn't get it. It wasn't about what she had in her. It was about what he had taken out. He had hollowed her out, and in that emptiness she had found an indestructible core of strength. She slid the letter into a drawer, burying it beneath old receipts. He was a ghost, a chapter in a book she had long since finished reading. She walked out into the garden, where Ben and Leo were looking at a ladybug on a rose petal. Ben looked up and smiled at her, that easy, gentle smile. Leo ran to her, wrapping his small arms around her legs. "Look, Mommy, a ladybug. Can we make a wish?" Amelia knelt down, hugging her son tight, breathing in the scent of sunshine and childhood. She looked at Ben, at the home she had made, at the life she had built from the ashes of a spectacular betrayal. "We don't need to, sweetie," she whispered, kissing the top of Leo's head. "All my wishes already came true." The phoenix had not just risen, she had learned to fly. Amelia's story is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It's a reminder that the deepest betrayals can often uncover our greatest strengths, and that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about the courage to reclaim your own narrative. From the depths of despair in a gilded cage, she found the strength not just to survive, but to build a life of authentic joy and purpose. Her journey from victim to victor shows that even when your world is shattered, you have the power to pick up the pieces and build something even more beautiful in its place. If Amelia's story of strength and redemption resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own power. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of overcoming adversity and finding second chances.